Good evening, everybody. I will call the Planning Committee meeting to order. We do have a few members of council who are delayed tonight in another meeting here. So they will be joining us shortly. That's Councillors Morales and Jim Harris, and Councillor Natalie Harris and Councillor Keenan Aylwin are joining us remotely tonight. The balance of us are in the chambers, along with the clerk and some members of the executive management team, as well as members of the planning department who are available via video conference to answer questions related to tonight's agenda. I will go through a consent agenda as we have 3 staff reports on tonight's planning committee agenda. Just ask that the item be held if you wish to discuss it later, and then we will proceed to the 2 public meetings that are scheduled for tonight. So the staff reports on tonight's agenda. The first one is a zoning bylaw amendment application, 112 and 136 Bayfield Street, 14 Sophia Street West, 113 and 115 Maple Avenue, Rockap Holdings Inc. Does anyone wish to hold that staff report? Seeing none, it is approved. Next staff report with regards to a zoning bylaw amendment application for 217 Dunlop Street. This is from PBM Realty Holdings Inc.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Raitma. And the third staff report tonight is a zoning bylaw amendment application for 407, 411, 413, 417, and 419 Mapleview Drive West.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Gary Harvey. Okay, so we'll discuss those 2 items after the public meetings tonight, 217 Dunlop and the Mapleview development application, or at least staff reports on those. But we'll proceed now to the public meetings. And just a reminder that the items that are approved tonight go forward to the City Council meeting on January 17th. So just for those watching or participating in the meeting who may be wondering when the matter would go to council for final consideration. The one that's been approved tonight will go forward on January 17th, and then pending what happens in the debate later, those items would go forward on the 17th, or something else might happen with them, depending on Planning Committee's decision. Okay, we'll move now to the public meetings, although registration to speak prior to the meeting was encouraged. If you haven't registered and wish to speak, please email cityclerks@barrie.ca or call 705-797-5353. Staff will send you the information required to participate in the meeting. The first public meeting tonight is to review applications for zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of subdivision submitted by the Jones Consulting Group on behalf of Mapleview Drive South Innisfil Limited for lands known municipally as 953 Mapleview Drive East. This is in Ward 10. The second public meeting is to review applications for a zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision submitted by the Jones Consulting Group on behalf of ASA Developments for lands known municipally as 108, 116, and 122 Harvey Road. That's in Ward 6. Members of Planning Committee will be listening to the presentations and comments received during the public meetings, but will not be making comments or debating the items tonight. Members of Planning Committee will have an opportunity to provide comments when the staff reports are considered at a later date. The purpose of the public meeting is, of course, provide an opportunity for the public to provide feedback on the subject applications for council's consideration. The ward councillor will be able to ask questions of staff, questions of clarification on behalf of residents who might not otherwise be able to attend or in their interest. Other committee members, including myself, we will ask our questions after the meeting or via email at a later point. Questions that are asked by residents during the meeting will be noted by staff and the applicant. However, we won't be doing a back and forth or question and answer session tonight. If you do ask a question during the public meeting, our staff will endeavor to answer that in the staff report when it comes forward. Ms. Banfield, Director of Development Services, could you confirm that notification was conducted in accordance with the Planning Act for the public meetings?
Yes, Mary Lynn, it was.
Thank you very much. I'll now call on Ray Duhamel of the Jones Consulting Group to provide the presentation concerning an application for zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision on behalf of Mapleview Drive South Innisfil Limited, located at 953 Mapleview Drive East. We have the PowerPoint, but do we have the planner?
I was on mute. My apologies. Your worship.
Ah, there we are, Mr. Duhamel.
Great. You answered my question if you can see my screen, so thank you for that. My name is Ray Duhamel with the Jones Consulting Group. I'm presenting this evening on behalf of Mapleview South Innisfil Limited, who owns lands on the south side of Mapleview Drive that are proposed for a plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment. And I will. This first slide is an aerial photograph of the lands, which are shown in red. The overall property area is approximately 19 hectares, and which translates into just a little bit under 50 acres. The property has 144 meters of frontage on Mapleview Drive, and the surrounding land uses include an existing residential subdivision to the northwest, which was registered in 2004, and then there's also existing residential development on all sides that are all form part of the Hewitt secondary plan, and I'll get into that in a few minutes.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if we have the right.
Yeah, sorry,
Hi.
Mr. Duhamel, the PowerPoint is, or I guess they're still working on it, but it's not the correct one. Or at least it's not advancing.
What slot picture or image are you on? Maybe I'll stop sharing and try again.
Yeah, so we were seeing the Harvey Road PowerPoint, and so we should be on the 953 Mapleview.
Yeah, I'm sharing that one. Maybe what I'll do.
Sorry, it's, I think it may be on our end, Mr. Duhamel. Thanks, Councillor Harris.
So is that being shown on your end then? Is that what we're?
No, now there's no PowerPoint showing.
Okay, so let's try this again. I'm going to share from scratch. Maybe it was done this a few times, so I'm surprised there's a problem, but you know what? Deal with what we can. So let's try once more. Please let me know if you can see.
There we go.
That's correct now?
That's the Mapleview Drive one.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So I'll start over again, if that's all right with everyone, since we were on the wrong slide. My apologies for that technical challenge, if I contributed to that. I represent Mapleview South Innisfil Limited. I think I mentioned that. They own lands on the south side of Mapleview Drive, located at 953 Mapleview Drive East. This slide, now hopefully you can see. Do you see the slides advanced now still? Are we good?
All good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. The property is outlined in red. All the lands that you see undeveloped on all sides are within what's known as the Hewitt secondary plan area. I'll get to the policies and the mapping for that in a moment. The existing development is to the northwest, which is an existing subdivision that was registered in about 2004. Throughout the course of this presentation, you will hear the word Sandy Cove Creek. I'll mention that in a few slides. So just keep a note of that on the subject lands, the Sandy Cove Creek, which used to be a municipal drain called the Red Fern Municipal Drain, that council decommissioned or abandoned a couple of years ago, is proposed to be rechannelized and substantially improved environmentally to turn it into a proper creek, stream corridor in the eastern portion of the site and the south portion of the site. And I'll show you a map of that in a moment. Just for some surrounding context, again, the Maple Ridge High School is open, and that's located right in this location. There's a future fire station right across the street. And if you drive down Mapleview Drive, you'll see a lot of construction going underway right now. There's a new sewer being put on in Mapleview Drive, and there's house construction going across the street. And there will be more house construction, substantively more house construction occurring in 2022. Standard practice in any development application is make sure that the applications are consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the growth plan and the Lakes and Growth Protection Plan. In my opinion, these applications do just that. They provide a compact, transit supportive form of development with that use planned infrastructure with a range of housing types, and they exceed density targets and are protecting natural heritage. In fact, in this case, enhancing natural heritage features. I mentioned a little bit ago about the Hewitt secondary plan. That's what this plan is. It's a secondary plan or an amendment to the city's official plan. That is a master plan community that would see approximately 26,000 people come to this particular area of Barrie. The property is shown in red, as I'm showing you in my cursor here, and the designations of the land are the yellow. The primary yellow designation is the residential area. There's a mixed use, which is the purple. The green is the Sandy Cove Creek, which again we'll speak to a little bit more detail. And then there are conceptual stormwater management ponds shown on the plan, but ultimately the locations were further refined through detailed design work. These lands, lastly, are located in what is known as phase 1 of the Hewitt secondary plan area. So the first phase to proceed to approvals. This second slide for the Hewitt secondary plan area is what's known as a master plan. And the master plan shows the conceptual layout of roads and the configuration of a variety of community facilities. And in this area, in this particular case, there had to be alterations as a result of the rechannelization and environmental improvement to that stream corridor. But one of the first steps in the process, which I'm sure this council has seen many times, is that in the Hewitt secondary plan area, a conformity plan must be submitted and reviewed by staff to allow staff and departments a chance to review the plan to make sure that it conforms to what the intent of the master plan was. And only after that conformity plan has been approved by staff, only for the purpose of conformity with the master plan, can formal applications be considered and ultimately considered by both by council in terms of the rezoning and by staff for in the context of the plan of subdivision. And so you'll see this green area in the central and south portions of the plan. That's the realignment of the Sandy Cove Creek. And then a mixture of single detached units, townhouses, and at the time, high and medium density was proposed with a single access out to Mapleview Drive. And then to the east here, if you can see my cursor, that's the proposed extension of Prince William Way from, it's a road that's actually partially built now, will ultimately extend all the way from Big Bay Point past Mapleview Drive and curve to the west and down to Lockhart. As is typical with subdivision and rezoning applications, there were a number of reports that were submitted as part of the application. All of these reports are available on the city's website for review, and you can email any questions to the city's file manager, who is Shelby White, and she may ask me for any additional information or follow up as a consequence of any comments that are received. This is the first application, which is the plan of subdivision itself. Variety of colors on this plan that you can see on the left side of your screen. Sandy Cove Creek is the area that's in green, and then it transitions into a stormwater pond that is on this land, as well as the draft approved lands immediately to the west. There's also medium density blocks shown in purple, and then a variety of townhouses and single detached lots. Overall, as you can see from the stats on the right side of the page, 466 units, just under 40% are singles, which is 183 singles, and then 283 medium density units in the form of street townhouses and then the medium density blocks. Overall, there's just under 3 hectares of land being proposed to be conveyed to the city for environmental protection. There's 80 people and jobs per hectare and 40 units per net hectare. Both of those density targets exceed what's required in the growth plan and the city of Barrie's Hewitt secondary plan. Just a couple more slides. This is the pedestrian circulation plan that was accompanied the application, illustrating the location of 2 dual sidewalks, of course, along Mapleview Drive and along the east-west roadways. And there's a minor collector here. And then there's single sidewalk streets, as well as pedestrian linkages through the natural heritage and storm pond areas, dual sidewalks to the south on another major collector down here. And there's also potential transit routes here and along Mapleview Drive. And this is the last slide. This illustrates the various residential zoning and other categories proposed. The prominent zones are R5, which permit street townhouses and single detached. The environmental protection zone will apply to the Sandy Cove Creek. Stormwater pond is open space. R5 to the south here, there's a buffer to a woodlot to the southeast that's also zoned EP, as well as 2 medium density blocks. There's a special provision proposed for this small block here, which would allow for stormwater and access to the mixed-use development that's proposed right, the original severed lot out of this property. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Duhamel. I'll call on Ms. Banfield to give us a update on the status of the applications.
Thank you for the introduction, Mayor Lehman, and good evening to you and to the members of Planning Committee. So just a very quick update on the zoning amendment and draft plan of subdivision application before you to permit 466 new units. A neighborhood meeting was actually held back in 2019 in person at a church. No one showed up. And actually, this was one of the first ones that we started saying, hey, if we're looking at neighborhood meetings in these secondary plan areas where nobody is actually quite living. So those are the ones you've seen lately where we've said we actually haven't had a public or a neighborhood meeting in advance of the public meeting. Because no one showed up to this one. So at any rate, that still does not mean that we don't do a full review of all these applications, and that is underway right this moment. And we are obviously taking a look at all of the planning policy, the city's official plan, the secondary plans, looking at the compatibility and integration of this proposal with the surrounding land uses and the alignment of all of the adjacent properties, the analysis of intensification targets and population and employment, as well as looking at the medium density blocks, the provision of neighborhood services, all of those things, the variety of land uses that are going to contribute to a neighborhood mixed use node, looking at the justification and appropriateness of the requested site specific provisions, as well as environmental impacts, reviewing those, as well as looking at traffic and the confirmation that the entire development can be supported by the services, either existing or planned infrastructure. So all of the comments that we have heard so far, the technical comments, as well as anything that we hear tonight from members of the public will be included in and addressed in the planning staff report that will likely be brought back to council in 2022, if you can believe that. And that would be for the consideration of the zoning bylaw. Should the zoning bylaw amendment be approved, the subsequent applications, either through a draft plan, a subdivision, or even site plan at this point are delegated to staff for approvals. The subsequent approvals would happen at the staff level. As always, all of the submission materials, key dates, anything associated with this application are available to view online on the city's proposed development webpage under Ward 10. And alternatively, you can also contact the file manager, who's Shelby White, directly. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Ms. Banfield. This is the portion of the meeting where we would hear from the public. Now, we have not had any speakers register in advance. Ms. Cook, nobody's called in during the meeting. Okay, just a last note for anybody out there watching who wants to speak in the meeting, it's cityclerks@barrie.ca. And you'd think I'd have memorized the phone number by now. 705-797-5353. The board counselor is not here tonight to ask any questions of clarification. Are there members of planning committee who wish to ask a question of clarification? Okay. Since there are no questions from other members of planning committee, we haven't had anybody call in at the last minute or email, then I can declare this public meeting concluded. If you are watching tonight and you have written comments, please submit them to Shelby White, shelby.white@barrie.ca, and she will, she's the file planner and will receive and address your comments. Okay, then we will proceed directly to the second public meeting tonight. It is for 108, 116, and 122 Harvey Road. It's an application for zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of subdivision, also submitted by the Jones Consulting Group. Mr. Duhamel, you are up again.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, members of committee. Hopefully there's no repeat of the technical challenges. Can you please confirm you can see the screen with 108, 116, and 122 Harvey Road on?
Yep, we can see it, all good.
Great, thank you very much. Again, my name is Ray Duhamel with the Jones Consulting Group, and I'm representing ASA Development, Inc., who owns 3 lots, 108, 116, and 122 Harvey Road, north side of Harvey Road. There's the file number for reference for anyone who wants to write in and or provide comments to the file manager at the city, who's Tyler Butler. I have a split screen in front of you showing some area context and aerial photographs. On the left side of the screen, the property shown in red, it comprises the easterly 3 lots out of the 6 large lots that front onto Harvey Road in this area. The site is combined, these 3 lots form about 2.5 acres, which is, 2.5 hectares, which is about 6 acres. And there's about 127 meters of frontage on Harvey Road and about 195 meters of frontage on Beacon Road. And I'll speak to Beacon Road in a moment, or the Beacon Road right of way. Some of the area context is there's the city water reservoir to the east. There is the Bell Media Park, business park lands to the east. There's a residential subdivision, Maple Woods to the south, Trillium Woods Park and Elementary School to the south and southwest. I've already spoken about the large lots that exist for redevelopment to the west, and then the existing subdivision comprising singles and townhouses immediately to the north. And when you look on the right side of the screen, you'll see that in a little bit more detail. There's Montserrat Park and Montserrat Street immediately to the north. And where it says Beacon Road Extension, that illustrates the proposal to extend the physical construction of the road from the terminus currently at Montserrat Street down to Harvey Road to align with Rushwood Drive. So again, this right of way is currently in the city's ownership, but the extension of the street has never physically occurred, and that is proposed as part of this development application. This is a slide showing the 3 existing dwellings that exist on the 3 existing lots. They are proposed to be demolished to be replaced with the proposed development form. Some of the surrounding area pictures. To the north is Montserrat Park. This is the existing housing immediately to the north of townhousing. There's a hydro line corridor to the east and the Maple Woodlands subdivision immediately to the south. As I mentioned in the previous application, all applications must be consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the growth plan and the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. And in this case, I feel that although those tests have been met, it's a compact form of development that will optimize the existing infrastructure that's in place. We're proposing a range of mixture of housing types. It exceeds the density targets that are set out in the provincial documents as well as the city's official plan. It's building in the existing built-up area, and it's protecting natural heritage features. This slide is the City of Barrie official plan. An official plan is a document that guides the development of land and land uses over a 20-year horizon. The yellow is as you can see on this property, it's designated yellow, which is the residential area in the City of Barrie. And immediately to the east is the general industrial designation. So there's a hard line along Beacon, which shows the residential versus the industrial divide. This slide illustrates the zoning on the lands. These lots are zoned in an R1 category, and there's a proposed zoning bylaw amendment to go along with this. Parks to the north and the south are zoned open space adjacent to the site, and there's townhouse zoning to the north and some singles to the south, as you can see in this category. As is typical in all cases, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before an application is filed. And these reports have all been prepared and submitted to the City of Barrie, and they're available for view on the City of Barrie's website. And if there's any questions, you can email the city's file manager, Tyler Butler, and he may ask for any questions or information from me as well, as I noted before. Okay, so the first application is pretty straightforward here, but has a variety of elements. The proposal is, as I noted, to extend Beacon Road along the east property line and provide a road widening, a right-of-way widening along that area, as well as a widening along Harvey Road. Propose 12 single detached residential lots that front onto Beacon, the extension of Beacon. Staff requested that a local street, a mid-block local street, an east-west orientation be introduced into the site that will provide for a connecting point for the lands to the west. And ultimately, as you can see, even a potential connection to the Kemp Street, a road stub that exists beside Montserrat Park. Then in addition to that, there's 2 medium density blocks, and these would be developed through, if approved, ultimately approved through a site plan control application in the future. This is a concept plan to illustrate how those medium density blocks would be developed. The northern block is rather straightforward. As you can see, an in and out crescent condominium road with townhouse units, lots in this area, and an amenity area and some surface parking. And to the south, a similar crescent in and out with townhouses and an amenity area, but the addition of a 4-story residential apartment building with underground parking that would be oriented towards the intersection of Beacon and Harvey Road. Overall, as you can see from the stat table on the right-hand side of the page, about 127 units spread over the site area, and that works out to about a variety of different types. As you can see, different types of singles. So there's 12 of those, 64 townhouses and 51 apartment units, totaling 127, and an overall density of about 51 units per hectare. The zoning amendment is a bit more complicated on this site than the last public meeting that you saw. There are a variety, effectively 4 zones proposed. There's an R4 zone that are proposed for the singles that would be introduced along Beacon Road. The R4 zone is proposed to have some special provisions that relate to frontage and area, yards, and lot coverage. And I would say that these will be, they'll be more compact single detached lots than typically found in Barrie, and they will certainly be more affordable in the context of single detached units. So, kind of an exciting product to introduce along the Beacon Road extension. And then the northerly block here and along here where it says RM2SP and RM2SP here. This is for the townhouse development. And there's a variety of special provisions as I've listed on the right side of the page, including frontage and area of those units, density provisions, and various yard requests, permitting tandem parking, lot coverage. And then notably, I wish to point out that the amenity area, which has come up as part of the detailed technical review, there was a request that was not in the circulation, but I've added an amendment to the application to permit unconsolidated amenity area that includes private spaces. The same thing will be requested in the RA1 zone, which is the apartment zone, to recognize balconies as part of that amenity area. All in the context in this particular site, there's a park immediately to the north, there's a large park immediately to the south, and there'll be amenity area provided on site. So I think it's a great site to provide for a more compact form, while keeping in mind the height of the buildings and the context of the surrounding land uses. And so I already mentioned one of the special provisions for the apartment zone, and then there's just a specific setbacks for the daylighting triangle and yards and lot coverage that would apply to the RA1-2 special provision zone. So again, lots of detail on this slide. It's really a function of modifying the zoning standards to reflect a much more compact type of built form without introducing a lot of height onto the site. And I have 3 last slides to illustrate the type of built form that are conceptually prepared for the site. Here are the examples of the singles that would front onto the Beacon Road extension. This is an illustration of a 3D rendering by Ian Malcolm Architect's Office of the townhouses. And then the last one is the 3D rendering of the 4-story residential building that is proposed to be oriented as per staff comments about bringing this building closer to the intersection of Harvey Road and Beacon Road. And with that, worship and members of committee and council, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duhamel. I'll call on Ms. Banfield again to give us an update on the status of this application.
Thank you again, Mayor Lehman, for the introduction, and good evening again. So I will provide a quick update. This application to rezone from the residential single attached dwelling to allow for 127 residential units is now under technical review. A neighborhood meeting was held back in the summer, and 24 residents, including our ward councillor Gary Harvey, as he was helping Councillor Natalie Harris, so she was unavailable that evening, the applicant's planning consultant and city staff. So we definitely heard from members of the public about this at the neighborhood meeting. Some of the concerns raised were around the increase in traffic potentially on Harvey Road and Beacon Road due to the proposed development. Several residents of Montserrat Street expressed concerns about just the traffic patterns in the area properties, vehicles wanting to circumvent veterans and ESSA, and the need for traffic calming measures in the area. The residents who had been living through the Harvey Road construction were very interested in terms of the timing of construction, as well as inquiries regarding shadowing, privacy impacts, and then inquiries were received as well about the amenity space that was going to be provided and if there'd be connections into Montserrat Park. So the correspondence also, we actually received some written correspondence in advance of the public meeting that reiterated a lot of those previous concerns about traffic. And again, just generally speaking about the traffic patterns in the area. From a technical perspective, we're still taking a look at comments from the Conservation Authority, the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, as they've asked for some additional natural heritage information. So that is going to form a phase 2 of the EIS. As always, we take a look at compliance with the provincial planning policy, the city's official plan, the justification and appropriateness of what's being requested, as well as an understanding of the functionality of the site, limited but not including but not limited to parking, landscaping, amenities, pedestrian connectivity, safety, community safety, all those things we look at, as well as the traffic pattern circulations, including the interface between Beacon Road and any sort of the impacts on the surrounding road network, and compatibility and consistency of this proposed development with the existing approvals in the area, as well as any sort of anticipated development. As always, all the comments that we get through the technical review, as well as comments that we hear tonight, will be addressed in the planning staff report that'll come back in 2022. And some of that timing really is going to depend on the consultant in terms of their timing to look at that additional environmental work that's requested by the Conservation Authority. As always, submission materials, key dates, everything associated with the application is available online on the city's proposed development webpage under Ward 6, and the file manager is Tyler Butler. You can always contact him directly. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Ms. Banfield. We'll now move to public comments. Staff will provide the option to the speaker to unmute themselves. If you're calling in by phone, you can press #6 to unmute. And just a reminder, it is cityclerks@barrie.ca, 705-797-5353 if you wish to call in and speak at this public meeting. We did have one resident pre-register to speak. That's Ms. Stephanie Douglas. Welcome to Planning Committee, Ms. Douglas.
Thank you. I really just had one question, and that was about the proposed apartment. Is that planned to be a rental unit, or is that planned to be condominiums, like sold units?
Well, normally we don't do Q&A at a public meeting, but you're the only speaker and that's your only question. And I will go to Mr. Duhamel and say whether he knows the answer to that right now.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Committee Council, through to Stephanie. No final decisions have been made on that. The anticipation is likely there'll be a condominium tenure, but no final decisions have been made.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here, Ms. Douglas. Any other speakers that have registered to speak? No one's called in. Okay. Well, then with that one question, that's it for public comments, I think, tonight. Councillor Natalie Harris, you're the ward councillor. Do you have any questions or clarification about this application?
Oh, Mayor Lehman, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For anyone watching, if you do have comments, you want to write in to the city and provide those comments, please submit them to Tyler Butler. He is the planner on this file, and that's tyler.butler@barrie.ca. And of course, all the information is available on the city's website under proposed developments, Ward 6. Thank you for being here for both meetings, Mr. Duhamel, and we will declare the second meeting concluded and move on with Planning Committee's agenda.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there were two items held on the agenda tonight. The first was a staff report concerning the application for zoning bylaw amendment at 217 Dunlop Street. That's by PBM Realty Holdings, Inc. It was held by Councillor Riepma. Go ahead, Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question or two for Ms. Banfield. And then I have an amendment. So I'll put it on the floor and then I'll amend it. I guess my question, Ms. Banfield, is to do with gross floor, just a second, gross floor area. And I wondered if you could just define that for us, for the people that aren't planners that would be interested in knowing what that means.
Ms. Banfield.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. So gross floor area is a defined term in our zoning bylaw, and I can definitely read it out to you. And ultimately, it is a combination of all of the uses contemplated in a proposed building, although of course, as I'm looking for you, but shall mean the total area of all floors in a building, excepting a basement in a residential building, measured from the outside face of the exterior walls, but exclusive of any part of a building which is used for storage or parking of motor vehicles other than automotive purposes as defined in Section 3 in this bylaw, for storage, stairwells, or for mechanical or electrical equipment providing services for the entire building. In addition to the exceptions in calculating the gross floor area for dwelling apartment, the part of the gross corridors which are in excess of minimum corridor areas required by the provisions of the Ontario Building Code, an area occupied by a recreational amenity shall not be included. That's the definition.
All right. So translating that into English, it really is the amount of building volume, if you will, or square footage of a building per land area. In other words, if I'm correct, and you can stop me if I'm wrong. If I have 1 square foot of property and I put 1 square foot of building on it, then I've got a GFA of 100%. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Give or take, you know, the nuances of the little definition bits, but that's roughly what it is, right?
Mayor Lehman, can I ask Councillor Rima to repeat that? I'm not following him.
Okay. So GFA really is the ratio of the building area to the land area. Is that correct?
Gross floor, sorry.
I'm going to jump in here. So GFA in the application is expressed as a percentage.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what Councillor Rietman is getting at is where we talk about gross floor area, you can talk about square feet, but in our, for tonight's purposes, it's the percentage of the land area. The total building area is the percentage of the total land area. So he just gave the example of you got a 1 square foot building site and you put 1 square foot of building on it, you've got 100% GFA. If you've got 2 square feet, you got 200% GFA.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So just to be clear that in this application, the GFA is 595%.
Correct.
Correct.
That's what the request is for 595%.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So in this application, we basically have a building that is 600%, 595% of the land area that it sits on.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. All right. I guess the size of the building then drives a lot of what the bylaw talks about in terms of setbacks and things like that. In other words, if the building was 400% instead of 595%, the building would be smaller. Is that correct?
Through you, Mary Lehman, correct, it would be smaller.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor and members of the committee, this is a really important piece of property along the city's waterfront. And I think we only get a chance to do this once, and we need to make sure that we get it right. And I don't know whether you've had a look at the block plan that is attached to the report. It's Appendix F, and it's page 35. And I always think, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And what we have here on that picture is a picture of this building, and it's compared to the building right next door to it, which is the Flamenco at 8 stories, and Lake House, which is 10 stories, and this one, which is 12. And you can see as well, just in terms of the proportions, compared this building to the Flamenco next door to it. This one's the Flamenco, you know, in terms of volume, much, much larger. And my concern with this one and with this bylaw is the problem of the overbuilding of this site and its impact on the streetscape and on the North Shore Trail right beside it. And if you look at the recommendation that's before us, in item A, it deals with side yards, and we're reducing the side yard from 15.63 meters down to 6 meters. In B part, we're reducing the side yard setback from 12 meters, 12.6 meters, down to 6 meters. In D part, we're increasing the gross floor area from the 400% that's permitted to almost 600%. In E part, what's permitted is 30 meters in building height, and what is proposed is 49.5 meters in height. F, the landscaping along the rear lot line goes to 0 instead of 3 meters. And in G, the buffer width goes to 0 instead of 3 meters. And so in summary, it looks like on these matters, these standards, almost every one of them is being cut in half. And the reason for that is the GFA, because the GFA permitted is 400 and we're about at 600, which means that the building is about 1.5 times larger than what is originally permitted. And I think that's a problem, especially in this location. And I just point out that the one that we just approved on consent, that one, the GFA is 438%. So this one is considerably larger, 1.5 times larger, and it's at the very edge of our urban growth center. And it is larger than the buildings beside it. And so, Mr. Mayor, I have a motion that I would like to put forward. It's a referral motion, and I know that that's not debatable, so I don't want to put it on the floor at this moment because I'd like to have some discussion if there is any discussion. But my motion would be to defer it to back to or refer it back to planning staff so that they can give us a drawing or a plan or a report that fits all of the C2-1 zone requirements so that we don't get any of these amendments, or at least we don't get very many of them. So that when it comes back to planning committee, we can have another look at it. And at that point, we can really appreciate what the differences are and maybe what we should be looking at in terms of approving something on this property. So, but I will hold that, Mr. Mayor, until we have some other discussion.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Riepma. Others on this application, Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Hearing the comments from Councillor Riepma, I would, and I appreciate Councillor Riepma that you're not putting it on the floor so we can have a little bit of discussion. I wouldn't be supportive of such a referral, and this is why. And I listened to the words that you said very intently. Send it back to staff so they can essentially write another recommendation within the parameters that you would like. If that just seems kind of like a do-over. I think, you know, I remember the question being asked in the past before, and when staff say, we stand by our report, right? We stand by the report. If they didn't stand by it, the report wouldn't be in front of us. So if we just because we don't like it, we can amend it, let the votes fall where they may on specific sections, but just to send it back to staff, I don't like the optics in the process of that. I trust that what staff recommended here is their preference. And again, it is our duty technically and our job to amend it, approve it, not approve it or amend it as such, but just to do a blanket here, staff, we don't like it, do a do-over, I think is sending a really, really bad message to staff, not just here, but for applications going forward, that if we don't like the recommendation, it's almost a little bit intimidating to staff saying, why don't you write a report that we like this time and take the hint. So I have huge concerns with that. Again, now if you or any other councillor has specific amendments that we do on the floor, it might not be clean, but at least it's proper process. So through you, Mayor Lehman, if I can ask to Ms. Banfield, is the current recommendation on before us, is this your planning department and use, excuse me, is this the planning department's recommendation? I know what the answer to that is, but I'll let you, I guess, take that question where you may.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Council Morales, this is the professional planning recommendation on the application that's been submitted to the City of Barrie.
Perfect. And I see, I'm just pulling it up again. Usually, sometimes in other staff reports, planning staff will provide alternatives. I don't believe I see any alternatives here. Obviously, planning that usually that doesn't happen. That's with other kind of staff reports. But is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Council Morales. No, there are always recommendations or always alternatives. One alternative is always to return to staff, and the other alternative is to make a refusal decision to go against the recommendation. Okay, perfect. With the alternative to return to staff, how does, because maybe I might have to eat my words, how is that envisioned usually? I presume, you know, this is your not best offer, this is your objective planning opinion, but to go back to staff to review specifics, or more of a blanket work within the parameters that were alluded to earlier. Through your, Mayor Lehman, to Councilor Morales, the actual wording ties it into referring back to staff, but the option isn't recommended because often the applications have changed through the review of the technical comments, and staff do say in those alternatives that a refer back to staff likely won't change the recommendation. Oh, okay, perfect. And I'm going up to Appendix F. I actually had that open when everyone was talking about it, so that was coincidental. Offhand, even if it's if it's not a specific year, do you know roughly when the flamenco, I believe, was constructed, even the decade? I'm just trying to get context as to the neighboring property. Through you, Mayor Lehman, I don't, I'm sorry.
Late 80s.
Late 80s?
Might have been early 90s.
Perfect. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So I guess members of planning committee, I'm hesitant to send this back. I know it's not just height. I know there's obviously other concerns that might be had by staff here, but we're talking a building built about 30 years ago at 8 stories, and then a building approved last year, 2 years ago at Lack House at 10 stories. I think this is just a progression of a growing city from a small mid-sized small city, big town to a revered waterfront community that people want to live in for various reasons. Density is painful. Density is not for everybody, but I personally support staff's report and think it's prudent to support this. And I know I've said it before, but I think it's prudent to say this again, especially with a property like this. When we don't approve, specifically waterfront, when we don't approve density here, it means that density is going to get added to other projects. So I know there was a lot of concerns expressed over other applications last year when the heights were too high. Well, that's kind of what happened. So, you know, ideally spreading that height in the downtown perimeter would be ideal. So any applications that reduce those heights, and obviously there were some reductions even in the previous one that went on consent, is gonna have to be made up somewhere else. So I guess my last question, I do have a question out of that comment. Ms. Banfield, I know there's specific targets for and you're gonna have to help me with the word, that perimeter, the downtown, the UG, the proper name of that. There's specific targets about units and populations. So first, could you define what that perimeter is called? Second, what are those targets, and how far are we close to those targets? Because I think it's important to note the implications of any changes on something like this that it has for our growth targets.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Council Morales. So the terminology is the urban growth center, and we do try to get a density of around 150 people per hectare, or units per hectare, sorry. And then as part of the staff report, we always do the density analysis, and really what that's trying to, and I'm just trying to pull up what appendix that is. And really what that's trying to show is the existing density in the neighborhood in a per hectare on a small unit. These per unit densities are very finite. And so we do try to look at and showing council and the community what that density in the community is at around that per hectare. And that's where that density analysis comes in. And again, you can see through there, and I think it begins on Appendix G, which is page 36. And basically it's the study of taking a look at what's in that area in and about a hectare size. And the other part talks about, because this unit count is proposed to be either 22 or 40. You can see that in this area, the densities are around 48 or 49 units per hectare generally. So that is obviously lower than 150.
Do you know what the unit target is for the entire UGC? I just remember hearing, and not anecdotally, but in the past, like the city of Barrie wants X number of units within the UGC by year X, like not just the average number, because again, some towers will come in under, some towers will go over, but do you know the magnitude of the number?
Off the top of my head, Mayor Lehman, through you to Council Morales, I want to say it's around 12,000 people, give or take, but I don't have that number right in front of me.
Okay, perfect. So anyways, that just speaks back to the point I was making, members of council, but thank you for the time afforded to me, Mayor Lehman.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma, and then Councillor Kungle.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to some of the comments that Councillor Morales made. I don't want you to misinterpret what my intention is here. My intention is not to ask staff to change their report. That would be wrong. My intention is to ask for more information, and that's what my motion is about. My motion is to refer to staff to ask them to tell us what this building would look like if it met all the requirements of that C2 zone. Because we could tonight, make an amendment to this bylaw, but the problem comes in is that we really don't know what the impact of that would be. We could say, well, we don't want a GFA of 595, we want a GFA of 395. But I don't know what that would result in, and neither does anybody else. And I think if we're going to make a wise decision, that's what some of the information that we should have. And this, I just wanted to say, this is not about the number of units, because the building before us, the unit count is somewhere between 22 and 41. There's no definite unit number here at all. This has to do with the bulk and the scale of the building and how well or how well it does not fit into this streetscape and into this environment. And interestingly enough, Ms. Banfield just said that the general density in this area is in the 40s units per hectares. But this building is at 200-ish, depending on how many units you figure it's going to actually end up with. But I'm not concerned about density in this case. It could be, you know, full of very small units or one really big unit. It doesn't matter to me. I think from a perspective of city building, and that's what we're all about here, trying to build a great city. I think we need to have a good hard look at the bulk and the scale of this building. So that's all that I'm looking to do.
Thanks, Councillor Reitman. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. I'll comment first, and I've got a question to staff. So I'm I'm aligned to supporting getting more information around this, and do believe it's, you know, it's part of the appropriate process around being able to refer it to staff. But I am looking at Ms. Banfield on page 20 of the staff report, item number 84. There is some nice commentary about the GFA. And in there, it notes that staff are of the opinion that the increase is modest in contrast to other development proposals recently approved. And further, that the development of the site is a manner that is generally compatible. And so I didn't know if you could speak more if the modest in contrast is actually to that roadway and you're looking at a commentary on the block, or to other developments not necessarily in the immediate vicinity.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. So ultimately, it's about looking at everything kind of holistically. And so, you know, we are dealing with an old zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is 2009. And because of that, council sees amendments to the zoning bylaw all the time to try to bring modern development through an old zoning bylaw. And the fundamental is that you're going to get amendments. And so in 2009, you know, the 400% coverage in GFA was likely appropriate. And we definitely are seeing it, just generally speaking, increasing time over time.
Would it be, would the work effort here be one that would have an impact on next steps necessarily of this development around timelines? If staff brought back more information, as Councillor Reitman was asking, with respects to maybe the bulk or visual of the amendments?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, we would be requiring the applicant to do this work. We would be going back to them saying we've received this feedback from council, and the council has asked for this information. City staff don't design sites. We review what is brought forward to us. So at this point, it would be up to the applicant to take away this feedback and come back to do this work for us.
Thank you. I have no further comments.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Councillor Deputy Mayor Warden.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. First of all, for the mover of, well, not the mover of the motion, because nothing's been moved yet, but the anticipated mover of the motion. So just make clear what you're asking. So you want them to bring back a report on what would happen if we demanded the, I mean, you can't really say with the side, I mean, it's 6 meters, but depending on the height of the building, it may be more. So you want that come back with all of those as what it would be. So with no exceptions to the zoning bylaw. Is that right?
I've just emailed it to everyone here, and my motion would read that report DEV 025-21 be referred back to staff with the request that they return to planning committee with a further report that demonstrates the design of a building in substantial conformity with the C2-1 zone. Hey, I'm realistic enough that, you know, if they, I'd like to know, what does it look like when we meet most of the requirements that are in the C2 zone now? And, what's the consequences of us changing setbacks or changing GFA? That's the big piece of it.
Okay. We just approved one within the last half an hour ago with that it had a lot of exceptions to this. The setbacks were all reduced, etc. Was there any concern with things like that? We just approved one that had a lot of these exceptions to it? Not in the GFA, I don't think, but certainly in the setbacks.
Yeah, and I think that I'm when things come together on this one, I'm quite okay with some setback requirements changes if that's needed. But don't forget, the one that we just approved, the GFA there was 438%. This is almost 600. There's a huge difference in that.
Okay, and just a question for staff, and I'm not sure if they know the answer because it might be catching them off guard, but do we know what the GFA was on recently approved projects in the downtown area, even the Lack House and the View condos? I mean, I have no idea what the GFA was. I can't remember what they were. Do we have it handy?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, I don't have them right at my fingertips, no, but I do know that we have increased the GFA across the UGC, but I can look into it and provide some of those numbers to you.
Yep, maybe somebody could source that while we're continuing with debate. That would be really helpful. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Ward.
I guess the last thing is a comment. I mean, I guess I'm more concerned about having a very attractive building on that site than I am about the GFA or the setbacks. I mean, that's sort of my number one concern. And there were some reassurances that it might be an attractive building from the path. I mean, say we want about the flamenco, it's not a particularly attractive building when you're walking along the North Shore Trail. And I think the Lack House is going to be better. And I think this one has an opportunity to be better as well. So I'm more concerned about how the building looks than how it's than if it meets all the requirements. So I'm torn, but I want to hear what other people say.
Others wish to comment? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to the anticipated mover of the motion. Is the height of this building the concern, or is it the footprint of the mass of the building on the property? What is the real concern on it?
I think it's the mass of the building. The bulk. I think that it's just out of scale with what has happened on the street. I mean, right next door is just a 3-story house, So I think it's that kind of thing. That may be made up of some height, but most of it is the sort of the bulk of the building.
So if we sent it back and the developer went up, let's say 10 stories and narrowed the building, do you think that would be more impactful on the North Trail opposed to, like, the Lack House is a little bit shorter, but a lot wider, and I agree with Deputy Mayor Ward on the attraction of what we've seen in render drawings. I think it beautifies the water. So this is my concern. If it's the height of the 12 stories because you're beside an 8 and a 10, but if it's the mass of the square foot, like the footprint on the land, if the developer come back and went up 10 stories to make it a tall, narrow building, is that something that you would like to see on the waterfront?
I guess I'd have to see it to see whether I liked it or not. I mean, I certainly do agree with Deputy Mayor Ward. I mean, one of the things that we're really looking for is a really good looking building. But I think scale has a lot to do with that.
I'll wait to hear others if there's anybody else to speak. I have difficulty supporting a referral for that, and maybe a little bit of a comment. It feels that a lot of our developments are going through these same challenges with the reduction and stuff. And we've heard it, we're trying to have affordable housing, and we've got to build all kinds of housing from top to bottom with supportive to, luxury homes. It's everybody moves up the next step. So, I think that we have an inventory problem, I think, which is driving up prices. If, there's a house and there's 25 people looking to buy your house, the price goes through the roof. If you have 26 houses, the price will drop. So I think it's getting a little bit dangerous as we keep reducing our density and finding ways, to block development. And it's starting to show in, I just think we got to be really careful with the decisions we make around the table.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Maybe I'll just throw a couple of things out there at this point. I mean, I'll give you my take on this, then I'll go to the Councillor Ray Owen as ward councillor. First of all, I do think it's a beautifully designed building. I mean, we have a lot of buildings that are built without a lot of attention to, well, sorry, that's unfair. I would say this building is premium architecture, and it's nice to see a beautiful building proposed for our waterfront. That being said, this is a very unusual application. First of all, the number of units isn't fixed, but the range that's being given to us, and I understand that's because they might be double apartments or sort of single apartments, they're all really big. And that's why the number of units is so small, 22 to 41. I mean, normally when council considers a 12-story building, we're talking about 100, 120 units. This is 22 to 41. They're very, very large units. And that's why the GFA is so high. They basically jacked the floor area to allow very large units to be built here. I think the density, therefore, density in terms of people, units, vehicles, parking, not going to be as much of an issue, right? Because we just have, it's actually not a very high density building when you measure it in people or units per hectare. It actually fits with the UGC targets. And if it's at the lower end, it's actually not very high density measured as people or units, and big asterisks there, because measured as GFA, this is extremely high density. Councillor Riepma is not wrong. They're asking for almost a 200% increase over what's permitted to allow the floor area of the building to be larger, the floor area of the units. So that's the question that I think is in front of planning committee is, okay, we're being asked to approve a number of exceptions to setbacks, to density, and so on, to allow for the units to be bigger. Not a lot of policy basis for that, in my opinion. However, I think Councillor Thompson, you're quite right. You need all kinds of housing in the city. And I guess my perspective on this is, what's being asked for reasonable in terms of our planning policies and in terms of compatibility and so forth. So I have a couple of concerns about those things. First of all, I don't think there's a lot of basis in policy to just increase floor area. It's not a compelling reason unto itself for exceptions to the planning, the zoning provisions of the area. However, two things that, and sorry, also on the negative side, what concerns me, it's very hard to decide what's compatible with built form in this area. I mean, if you look at that picture in the appendix, the 3D, the oblique aerial rendering, the block image, it shows you've got two 15-story buildings. We've got the new LAC house at 10, got a building next door at 8, but everything to the east and north is largely single detached, although you've got some townhouses and mid-rise apartments, 6 stories on Albert Street. You get everything in this area of the city. So, is it a compelling argument to say it should only be 8 because the building next door is 8, or it should be 5 because the building next door is a single home? It happens to be owned by the applicant, which is probably why we haven't heard from the occupants about a 12-story building next door. I'm not compelled that this is out of character. And I'm not compelled, I think Councillor Morales makes a very good point, that 8 stories in the 80s might have made sense, and 12 stories certainly isn't out of whack in the 2020s, the 2020s. So I don't really have an issue with the height. I don't particularly have an issue with some of the setbacks, and this is why. Notwithstanding, I think the policy reasons for them are thin. I think the net result is a better building. And I think Councillor Riepma's point, which is, you could have just done this at 400%, which is the GFA that would have been permitted. They might have even been able to get within existing zoning at 10 stories and 400%. But that wouldn't have produced the building that they envisioned for the site and envisioned bringing to the waterfront in this location in Barrie. And so, you know, my take on it, just as a process point of view, from a process point of view, is if the planning committee does not wish to refer the application back, we're in this really unusual spot in the schedule, which is that I don't think this goes to council until January, what did I say at the beginning, 16th, 17th, and it's December 7th. So that gives us 5 weeks to get information from staff before final approval. So should you not refer it, but wish to get additional information, I think our proper procedure is to ask for that by way of motion. Even though that motion technically wouldn't be ratified until council, I think if it's an information request and planning committee wanted that information before giving final approval, I'm sure Ms. Banfield and her team would make best efforts, notwithstanding it is the Christmas break.
Mayor Lehman, I do have some of the other calculations if you want to know
Sure.
some of them. So Lac House, as an example, is 476%. Smart Center is obviously a large project, is 750%. The theater block was 970%.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So those are just some numbers for GFA percentages that council's approved.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll go to Councillor Allen and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And thank you for that very helpful process point, reminding us of the timeline here. I think that's a very reasonable approach. I happen to disagree with the idea that this building is in any way, shape, or form contributing to our affordable housing goals. I just don't buy the trickle down argument that gigantic luxury apartments help with the housing crisis that we find ourselves in. I also happen to disagree with Councillor Riepma that we shouldn't be concerned with density on this. We actually wish this building was perhaps a bit more had a bit more density, and these unit sizes are frankly huge. And I think you made a really good point, Mayor Lehman, about the thin justification policy-wise for the gross floor area that they're looking for on this site, and that it's really to allow for bigger unit sizes and not more density on the site. So I'm definitely interested in getting a bit more information on what could be done to reduce that the bulk of the building for the reasons that Councillor Riepma has stated. And I don't see too much concern with us having that conversation because I don't think this building really is taking us that far in meeting our goals from a planning perspective. So I'm not sure what that motion could look like, but I'm sure Councillor Riepma has an idea for what information he's looking for through his referral motion. So I'm not sure if I'll leave it to Councillor Riepma if he's looking to move that motion still or a slightly varied version of that.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I guess my first question would be to staff when it comes to rough timeline for getting this information. And like Mayor Lehman mentioned, we've got the holidays and stuff coming up. And obviously we don't want stuff being pushed to the last minute. And I'm sure you guys are pretty busy with other matters too. What rough timeline would we be looking at to be able to get roughly the type of information that has been spoken of so far?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey, again, we would be asking the applicant to do this work. We're asking for a massing exercise, not to design a building, so potentially it won't take too long depending on their schedule, but we would be having them come back and take a look at it.
Great. And just a follow up, because I know most of our applications have defined unit counts in them. Just kind of curious, why does this one have a floating unit count? Are they going to then sell the units by whatever size they can at the time, or it seems to be a unique way for an application to come through?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey. That's my understanding, is that they will, the applicant will market the building, and depending on the purchasers, there'll be a range of units, and all the provisions in the planning report are taken care of at the high end. So there'd be enough parking, and the density is calculated at the high end.
Great, that answered my next question because it was going to be parking. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Just before you move a motion, Councillor Eatma, I'm sorry, are there others who wish to speak? Okay, Councillor Morales, I'll come back to you, and Deputy Mayor Ward, I'll come back to you as well. Well, actually, no, I'll go to you guys now. Go ahead, Councillor Morales. I'll hold my comment.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Eatma, about the intent behind what you're doing. That was definitely helpful. Here's kind of like some things I've written down from all the comments that everybody made. So essentially, if this referral is successful and it goes to staff, and then staff is going to then require the applicant to provide that rendering based on those parameters, what's going to come back is one of two things. Well, no, it's only one thing. It's going to get taller and skinnier and more dense, as the mayor's, I believe he said. I'm not trying to paraphrase you there. The other alternative is they just
Sorry, Councillor Morales, I didn't say that at all.
No.
So no.
Sorry. So the density would increase if the GFA decreases, the density will increase. So my apologies, not the mayor, but if the GFA goes down to more in the 400s and less in the 600s, the intent is the unit count, the unit size is going to get smaller. So you're going to have higher density. So it's going to get taller and skinnier, or the alternative is it's going to stay the same. So I hear the compatibility maybe points that were brought up, but if anything, getting them to come back with a different design is going to, it's going to make it taller. So some would say it would make it more incompatible. Also, there was some other point brought up about affordability. To my personal opinion, this tower was never about affordability. Let's not pretend it was, and let's not use it as an argument against the applicant, because they weren't pretending it was otherwise. This is about providing luxury units, which are needed. Again, as was discussed before, throughout the spectrum, we need units of all densities, of all price points, and of all intents. And the way I see it is this might not move forward the needle on affordability of units directly. There's a bit of an argument for it frees up, it allows people to move to the next rung and frees up previous units in urban economics. But what it does mean is 22 less luxury homes being built in the annex lands being proposed. Now, obviously, it's not vis-a-vis. It doesn't mean that literally 22 less units will be built. But instead of putting 22 homes, luxury homes, somewhere in what might be greenfields likely right now, it means you're essentially stacking 22 luxury homes on top of one another and giving those families or those higher net worth individuals an opportunity to live in a more environmentally friendly, less impact way of developing. So I think that environmental aspect does need to be brought up. I think the other aspect is, while they are large in size, something that I've noticed in the GTA and what a lot of people will comment is Toronto doesn't see a lot of 3-bedroom condos. Some people say it's policy. Some people say it's responding to the market. Some people say that the city hall, both politicians and staff, the way they designed their policies essentially makes it, there's no incentive. It pushes the market to go to one unit. Some say it's greed, whatever it may be. The thing is, there's a lot of people are saying the argument that it's tough to find a new build condo in the midtown downtown area of Toronto where it's 3 bedrooms. So they have a supply problem on the size. I look at this and say, yes, these are going to be luxury units, and these are going to be 22-ish families, but it's providing a size that is necessary. And I see it as 22 less luxury homes being built on greenfields. So I agree with some of the comments that were made. I think personally that we should vote down the referral and then take those 5 weeks. And if there's specific changes that we get from the information from those 5 weeks, we can then take that time in January to amend them in or amend them out. Thank you.
Councillor Morales, Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. This gives me an opportunity to ask a question I had about all 3 reports tonight. It's on the one we've already approved, and it's on this one, it's on the next one. And they all have a paragraph that says, the city can the city can seek to secure community benefits in accordance with section 6.8 of the official plan. A portion of the community benefits secured through the approval of the subject application could be allocated towards affordable housing development grant under the city's CIP. I guess I'm curious as to, in all three of these reports, I mean, there's no indication how much money that could potentially be. And I know you can't give me an exact, but is it thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? What are we looking at in terms of community benefit from these?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. Again, it really depends. It's based on the uplift value. So if based on the property of what the assessed value would be, if there was no increase in height or density, and then we do an assessed value of what it is with the increase, and then it's just the differential. This is 25% of the differential, the uplift, and that's the number. So what we have done in the most recent example is the theater block, where they had their section 37, and a portion of their, not the entire amount, but a portion of that was donated to, was a cash donation to our CIP that would be then distributed through the CIP program specifically for affordable housing. And that was around a couple $100,000. Some of the properties are much smaller values. Some properties, the uplift is around 50 or 60,000. It really does depend.
Okay, so subsequent question. So if we revise this so it met all the zoning provisions or substantially met them, would that be, there'd be no community benefits obtainable from them, from the developer?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Reapman, I'll come back to you in a moment. I think Councillor Harvey had something else to say. I guess a couple of comments that I want to make as well at this point. I actually am not going to support referring the item because I think there's a 6-week window in which we can get more information. So if the sole purpose of the referral is to get a sense of what the building would look like if it was built in conformity with zoning, I'm sure between the applicant and our staff, that information could be provided to council in advance of final consideration of the building in our January 17th meeting. I think the setbacks, the opportunity to use a little bit more of the site, end up with a more attractive building, a building that better reflects the pedestrian environment around it. And I think the other point that I would like to make around the progress of this application is members of committee will remember when it started, it was 15 stories. And what was really causing a problem was a requirement in the city's planning policy, which was for ground floor commercial, which is something we like to see in our downtown. But actually by removing that, the building was able to come down by 2.5 stories. And importantly, there were going to be 3 entrances to the parking garage for this building, which is a bit of a mess caused by the alignment on the site. And by allowing the use of these setbacks and the change in height, which reduces the number of parking spaces required, tandem parking as well helps. There's been a bit of a creative solution to allow a parking garage that'll work without creating a big, giant, ugly podium, which is what's required, unfortunately, on these sites that are close to the water table. So the setbacks, I said earlier, the policy rationale is thin. I actually believe that, but the built form rationale is actually pretty strong. I see that the setbacks here are going to result, by permitting the reduced setbacks, we are going to get a better building on our waterfront. A building that will work better in terms of its access points, a building that will work better in terms of the pedestrian environment. I understand the concerns around the gross floor area, but I think as we've just heard, it will hardly be our highest. And then the question becomes really in the eye of the beholder around the bulk of the building. But I think if planning committee's concern is really around that, you might consider not referring it, letting it go forward. And I'm sure in 6 weeks' time, we can get some good information around what the difference would be if we had a building that was built substantially in conformity with the zoning. And that would be my thought anyway. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I just wanted to follow up on what Deputy Mayor Ward was talking about when it comes to the community benefit. I can appreciate that there's obviously funds involved in having these larger structures when it comes to the CIPs and stuff, but I really think we need to keep that behind the scenes and not let us allow that to sway us in any way in any of our decisions moving forward. Because the reality of it is the dollar amounts, as Ms. Banfield mentioned, are very small, even when you're talking about a very large project like the theater block. So I just wanted to highlight that just because it kind of caused me a little bit of concern that now all of a sudden it made it appear that we may make decisions based on how much money the city would get as a result of these larger structures.
Any further comments? Councilor Rima, what would you like to do?
Actually, the clerk has helped out a great deal. And I won't put my referral motion as I had originally intended. But the clerk has suggested that staff in development services request the developer to provide a design of a building that substantially conforms to the requirements of the C2-1 zone in advance of the January 17, 2022 City Council meeting. And I think that's a very good approach. I think that's what you were talking about. And I think it's quite doable because that's still 5 or 6 weeks away. And I'm sure they don't mind working on Christmas Eve. And I think that will give us the answers that we've been posing tonight. So I would put that motion forward.
Okay, so sorry, is that that's an amendment to the motion in the staff report?
Yes.
To add an additional paragraph.
Yes,
correct?
add an
Okay.
additional paragraph.
Which we can certainly talk about. Councillor Jim Harris, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I apologize with some technical problems and earlier meeting. I missed some of the discussion. Just as a maybe general comment, and I recognize, there's different types of building, and I think some of the discussion has revolved around what type of building this is and what type of building it isn't. And I think, what's been presented, and I do agree that given where it is, having a very attractive building that adds to the location is something we'd really want to see. And I worry when we start to make comments on buildings that have a design purpose, whether it be affordable, and we start to create amendments and additions that will make the building possibly more expensive to build because we want it to look nicer. Similarly, we're looking at what this is a luxury building, and that's what its purpose is. So, what's been presented appears to be quite a attractive building, and it seems to be appropriate for the site. So I'm in line with the thinking that a bit of time might gain something, but ultimately what's been presented with the staff report seems to be something that would be a real addition to the area. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. So the amendment is on the floor to request that staff report back with information on the building as per the zoning. Councillor Rietmar or Madam Clerk, has that been the language on that been distributed?
I just sent it.
Just came through. Okay. Good. Once again, the cat is the star of the show. Okay. Sorry, I just want to be clear, Councillor Rima, the wording that's been distributed from the clerk would be that to request that the developer provide a second design of the building. I'm not clear that that was really the intent, but okay.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, my understanding is more about the massing. It would probably be more of a massing of the building as opposed to an actual redesign.
Yeah, I think it's important that we ask for what we're looking for. So I know it's a distinction on wording. You may not, up to you, Councillor Rima, about your amendment, but I don't think we would be want to ask the developer to redesign, to provide a new full design. It's
No.
about showing us something like this massing plan that's in the staff report. Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. Just to give us a sense of what this building would look like if we didn't have the modifications. So I'm not looking for design. I'm just looking for a massing.
So Appendix F is the block context plan. That's the sort of oblique aerials that give you a sense of what the building looks like in context. That's kind of the information you're looking for. Is that okay? Okay, so I don't know if you want to amend the amendment to say, instead of design, to say massing, alternative massing or something like that.
Sure, that would be fine. Yeah, because that's the intent.
Okay. Members of Planning Committee clear of what the amendment reads? Okay, further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Okay, I think that carried, Madam Clerk. Yeah, I'll just call the question again. Those in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 1, 2, 3. Sorry, let me say it again. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it fails. Oh, I'm the breaking? No, I'm in favor of the amendment. If I'm voting, I'm in favor of the amendment. So it carries. So, no, it's 6-4, I think. Yeah, Councillor McCann's not here, so. No, Councillor McCann's not here. So I'm going to call the question one more time, hands all the way up. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and myself is 6. So that carries. Yeah. Okay, thank you. On the main motion as amended, further comments? Okay, I want to make a comment, which is that, you know, I'm always in favor of receiving the information, taking a look at what the alternative would be. This has been a process already where the developer has reduced the height by about 20% and is asking for special provisions that support the vision they have for a building on the site. I happen to think it would be a jewel. It's one of the most beautiful buildings that I've seen proposed for our waterfront, especially in an environment where there are much larger buildings with much smaller units that are built with entirely different sort of development economics. And I think that notwithstanding, I'm always supportive of motion to get additional information so that council can have the full perspective on what it might look like. I do want to speak in favor of the setback requirements and ultimately the end result. It's this is not a question in this case of a policy of a type of development where we can be guided by other policies in our plan or objectives for the city. But in terms of the real question around the impact and setbacks, and I don't want to speak for staff as to the rationale. The rationale is laid out in a 104 paragraph staff report. There's a reason our staff have recommended this, both in terms of policy and in terms of built form. And I think ultimately this building, while it is an unusual application, no, let's be right up front. This building's not contributing to affordable housing. No stretch gets us there, I don't think. And the building is not particularly contributing to overall density goals. But it is in fact, by some measures of density, an entirely appropriate level. The 47 units, even at the higher, 41 units at the high end or 22 at the low end, It is just not going to generate traffic, overflow parking, the kind of problems that a very large building could have on a established neighborhood. So weirdly, by virtue of it being large units and fewer of them, I think the impacts on the neighborhood are going to be less. And so a building like this in a transition zone actually makes a bit more sense. That's why we measure density in terms of people and units, not just gross floor area. So look, do I think that the setbacks are to allow for larger units? Absolutely. But I think the net result of that is a better built form and ultimately a building that, because of the odd nature of its sort of numbers in the application, but in very real world terms, is not going to have as much of an impact as similar sized buildings might have on the established neighborhood to the east. So I am very likely to support this. I think when it comes forward, I'm supportive of it tonight. But I think it is fair whenever we are being asked to provide multiple exemptions from our planning provisions, our zoning provisions, especially when the policy arguments on it might be thinner. It's totally legitimate to ask, what would it look like if it was built in accordance with policy? But I think by allowing the variances from policy, we're going to get a building that we're going to be a lot more proud of. And I think happens to fit the neighborhood better. So those are my comments. And with that, I'll call the question on the motion as amended. Those in favor, please indicate. Is anyone opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously and it will go forward to City Council on January 17th. Okay, the next matter that was held by Councillor Harvey, and that is the zoning bylaw amendment application for 407 to 419 Mapleview Drive West. Go ahead, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll put the motion on the floor as printed. And I'd ask our IT people if they could put my slideshow up. Great, thanks. We can go to the next slide. First, I'd like to thank staff for all their work in this. I know this has been a fairly lengthy file with a lot of back and forth, an extreme amount of engagement from our community. But you will hear in my presentation that I'm opposed to the recommendation within the staff report. This first slide, first several slides, I've actually taken from one of the residents' PowerPoints when we had the public meeting back on February the 2nd. So the arrow to the right shows the subject lands where it's 5 parcels that currently 5 bungalows sit on. And then you'll notice to the west where there's a star that indicates the largest building that we have in the area on Mapleview, which is a seniors apartment that is 3 stories tall. And it's about half a kilometer away from the subject lands. Next slide. This slide shows a close-up of the transition that there is on the east and the west side of the apartment building to the adjacent 2-story residential homes on Ginger Street and to the plaza that is to the east, which is a single story. Next slide, please. This is an overview taken from Google Earth, where Mr. Clark highlighted back at the public meeting about the makeup of the area. And you'll notice that it's a residential area consisting of all single detached homes, especially within the circle area, which is the area in which these 5 parcels are contained. You'll notice that these homes are on significantly larger lots than everywhere else in the Holly area, as these homes are on half-acre lots. Next slide, please. Then as you get a little bit closer, there's 24 homes that are directly impacted by this particular proposal. And next slide, please. And as we get even closer, it gives you a better view of the size of the lots in comparison to the homes on the other side of Mapleview, which is the way the rest of the Holly area is consisted of, where we are very close to one another. Most homes are only a few feet apart. Next slide, please. Then as you zoom in, Mr. Clark highlighted at the public meeting what the potential impact and look would be on the rear of these Redfern properties with the proposed 3-story towns in behind their parcels. A significant change from what they've been used to over the last several decades. The homes on Redfern have been there for 32, 33 years, with actually one of the homes backing onto it being an original owner still there. Next slide, please. And this is a shot from the Mapleview side that he highlighted. I'll go to the next slide, and he gave a rendering. This one here shows a 5-story building because at the time it was at 5 stories. Now we're at 4.5. But it does give a fairly accurate rendering of the impact that these 2 blocks at the front of Mapleview will have on the community. And you'll notice to the east and to the west, it's bungalows that are on either side of the proposed lands. Next slide, please. When you look around the area, we don't have anything along Mapleview other than that one apartment building that's 3 stories. What's being proposed is 4.5 at the front and 3 at the rear. And the 4.5 at the front have rooftop terraces. It isn't until you go out onto Essa Road, which is a secondary intensification corridor, that you then begin to see these 3-story townhouses that were constructed in recent years. And actually that last open parcel will be a topic of conversation at next week's planning committee, I understand. Next slide, please. This is a shot of the proposed application that shows the 2 blocks of stacked back-to-back towns, each consisting of 12 units at the front for 24 in total, with tandem parking, so 3 parking spots per unit at the front. And then there's 3 blocks of 3-story towns at the rear that would each have 2 parking spots. And as you'll note, for the unit count, there's far too many parking spots being allocated. And I'll highlight some of the discussions that have occurred through that. Next slide, please. This is a sheet out of the tree preservation plan. As you'll see, there's far more X's on it than there are plus symbols. The plus symbols indicate trees that could be preserved. This particular tree preservation plan is not suggesting to preserve very many trees, literally a handful. We have had some additional discussions in regards to that, which I will also highlight again a little bit later. Next slide, please. Now, this is actually to scale. This is one of the actual blocks at the front of Mapleview that are being proposed that will be set back 15 meters from the curb, thus giving them a small front lawn just on the other side of the sidewalk, the way it's allocated here. And you'll notice these are the exact 2 bungalow homes that are to the east and to the west of the subject lands. You'll notice a dramatic difference in the height, but also to the setbacks. These homes have been there for decades, and they are significantly set back from the roadway in comparison to what's being proposed. Next slide, please. This slide is more of a comparison to show the height differences. One of the big issues that still exist in speaking to the residents is the height of what's being proposed and how it doesn't fit within the community in their opinion. So that, again, this is exactly to scale, showing what the height of the bungalows on either side would appear with the subject property in the middle to show the height differences between the two. And on that, I will get into a more detailed explanation as to why I oppose the current plan. Intensification is a sensitive issue with some, as residents will see their neighborhoods change, become busier and more dense. However, this should also create very livable and walkable communities when it's done right. Built forms should be of the right architecture, height, and density to integrate with the surrounding structures, especially with these infill applications. This application's been very difficult for many of the residents if they invested everything into their homes, and some have lived here in the area for as long as 32 years. No one could have predicted an application of this size ever coming forward. During the neighborhood meeting and the public meeting, we heard a whole host of concerns from residents in regards to height, density, fire concerns, and saving as many trees as possible, especially tree number 18, which is a massive tree. This proposal does very little to address the concerns beyond the fire safety issues that were raised. It's still 4.5 stories tall and 2 blocks of stacked back-to-back towns with rooftop terraces along Mapleview and 3 blocks of 3-story towns at the rear. The area is surrounded by older homes and half-acre lots, as earlier mentioned, that are very much set back from the roadway. With the proposed frontage being pushed forward towards the road, it will look out of place in comparison to the adjacent properties. However, the residents are accepting of that piece. The tree preservation plan only intends to save a handful of the identified 61 trees on the 5 properties, with no consideration being given for the mature trees along the rear fence line, which provide much needed buffer between the properties. The residents know that something's going to be built here. However, want to ensure that what is going to be built will integrate appropriately with the existing community and built form. This group has been very respectful and reasonable throughout the process, welcoming engagement with the developer. That one-on-one engagement only occurred this past Thursday evening after we found out just days earlier that this application was coming forward this evening. This just doesn't give ample time and opportunity for robust consideration of the proposal, whether it's myself as a councillor or the residents, along with the developer. On Saturday, I spent the entire afternoon knocking on doors of the 42 homes in the area, 24 of which back directly onto this property and will be immediately impacted. I heard it loud and clear that everyone was still concerned about the height, density, and the trees being cut down. Only one homeowner didn't have an issue with this application. I also met 2 unsuspecting new homeowners that bought their homes just months ago without any knowledge of this application. Mapleview is not an intensification corridor, and as earlier mentioned, is 310 meters away from Essa Road, which is a secondary intensification corridor. If we were dealing with an application on Essa Road, the conversation this evening would be very different. If this project were on Essa Road, we could actually be looking at these densities. The current application is asking for 72 units per hectare, which does not work on Mapleview, however, definitely could work on Essa Road. This entire residential area is zoned RM1, whereas RM2 is being requested with a whole host of special provisions, as this project does not come close to meeting the requirements of RM2, which permits 40 units per hectare and a maximum of 10 meters, whereas 12.5 meters is being sought. We all want more homes to be built in Barrie to help the much needed stock and to hopefully level off this housing boom that we are currently in. This isn't just a Barrie issue, this is an Ontario issue. But we cannot achieve this at all costs to our current residents just to meet growth target plans outside of an intensification corridor, especially when an application like this far exceeds prescribed density levels, with them being almost twice as what's being allowed for RM2. We've seen previous applications where there is disapproval from residents and the applicant comes back with a much revised proposal, like we saw in Ward 5 on Miller Drive, where the proposal went from a series of townhomes to a series of single dwelling homes satisfying the concerns of residents. And then again tonight, we saw a significant change in the proposal at Bayfield and Sophia that originally started at 34 stories and now got approved tonight on consent at only 12 stories. And that was them listening to the community. In a presentation from staff in January of 2020, it spoke of various densities for each built form, with townhouses being a targeted density of 42 to 54 units per hectare. In Schedule 1 of the city's official plan, it specifically identifies Essa Road as a secondary corridor with a target of 50 units per hectare, which is a significant variance in density from this application that is not on an intensification corridor. The requested density would be setting a new bar for density levels along Mapleview Drive, as no other development previously approved of this sort comes close to this density. This application is almost the density of a 6-story, 52-unit condo building that has been approved at 84 units per hectare, 2 kilometers up the road on Essa Road across from the Smart Centers Plaza. There is a vast difference between a 6-story condo and 46 townhouses reaching almost the same density. If we weren't going to follow the parameters as set out in the official plan, what's the purpose of having the plan? Especially when the new draft plan still earmarks this area as a residential neighborhood. I urge my council colleagues to reject this application in its current form, as this is not building a strong neighborhood. It is not in line with the official plan, nor is it good planning, intensifying an area to this height and density on a non-intensification corridor. What would be a reasonable compromise as a third party looking at this application, as I have looked at it from the outside, would be to bring it more in line with the surrounding area, would be to remove the rooftop terraces, which would effectively remove 1 story from the back-to-back blocks along Mapleview and still leaving it at 3.5 stories, which is still larger than anything in the area. Then by removing the 3rd tandem parking spot from the back of the rear of the back-to-back towns, as there is no need for 72 spots for 24 units. This additional 5.5 meters would then allow for the rear towns to be 2 stories tall with larger units that would sell for a higher price than extremely narrow 3-story models being proposed, and would only lower their count by 6 units to 40, where 5 bungalows currently sit. This would also lower the concrete wall effect that the 3-story units would create facing the Redfern backyards. These units are barely the width of a single-car garage and the front door. Through discussions with staff, I've advised that there is no reason for all of these perimeter trees to be destroyed, and that the policy is to save as many mature trees as possible, as long as they're in good health. The other piece of dropping the units, it would still leave this development at 63 units per hectare, which is still greater than what the RM2 allows at 40. Through discussions with the applicant, they've agreed to save as many trees along the perimeter in principle. However, when I attempted some further discussions today, we could not connect. Those are my comments. I would hope that, especially by looking at the renderings, my colleagues around the table would see that this is just still too grand. It started out as an 88 unit project, which was ridiculously massive. They went down to 72, which was still ridiculously massive. And this is still far too large in height for the area. This would set a new precedent when it comes to these types of projects in other areas also, especially when you've got bungalows on either side of it. It just does not fit. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. So to be clear, you are putting the motion on the floor and urging council to vote against it, or are you moving an amendment or an alternative?
At this point, I am requesting support in rejecting this motion. And I'll be quite honest with you, it's for several reasons, Mayor Lehman, and it really comes down to time. There's been attempts with the residents group. They've also had a planner that they retained, and there's only been an opportunity for one evening of discussions, and the developer has not come back with any changes. And we just didn't have time. It was such a short time frame between the time that I found out that this process was coming forward to tonight was less than a week. And the area residents only received their electronic notification on Friday late in the afternoon, just before business hours were done. So there really just wasn't time to accomplish what I would have liked to have accomplished. And I'm sure the residents are definitely open to having some more fruitful discussions. Thursday evening was a very good discussion. I thought things went very well. I was there more as a bystander, listening in on how they could come to some resolve. But then the discussions later on, there really wasn't any resolve with what was discussed that night.
Okay, just to help planning committee understand. So the developer has twice reduced the application. Are you saying that they're not open to reducing it any further, or you're saying with additional time, you believe there could be further discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I do believe with the time that we have, because this will not be coming back until the 17th of January, because that was another concern of mine. Initially, the information that we were receiving was it was going to be coming back next week, which again is another tight timeline. The optics, I'll be quite honest with you, that some of the residents have raised with me is not good, because everything seemed to be in a rush format, and obviously we're in budget mode right now too, which obviously created another strain on my time, along with working full time to try and accomplish all this. So really, there was no time to get this done. We had a good conversation. The applicant hasn't come back with anything since that conversation. I'm just very hopeful, and I do believe that if we no different than, I'll be quite honest with you, this proposal has a lot of similarities to Athabasca. And if we did have the gallery open, I'm certain that we'd be having standing room only with the amount of people that are still extremely upset and interested with what's going on with this application. And it's really going to take some time, no different than what that row of townhouses at Athabasca did. And now we've got a row of 2-story, 8 townhouses that are almost complete at that location now. So I'm confident that we can come to some resolve here. It's just, I think we're definitely going to need some more time.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the process to do that, that you're suggesting the planning committee. Councillor Harvey, just, I mean, if, Madam Clerk, if council simply voted against the motion on the floor, what would happen?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of council, if they voted down the motion, they can, a person or a member of council, I should say, can reintroduce an amendment with the motion and have it passed at council.
Okay, so, and this was my concern, Councillor Harvey. So what would happen even if council or if planning committee said no tonight? What motion would go forward to city council, Madam Clerk?
Mayor Lehman, through you to members of council, a motion that just would receive this motion, because it would lose if it gets voted down.
So my suggestion, Councillor Harvey, would be deferring the matter for additional conversation with the applicant. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. The reason I asked council to vote this down, this is the exact same process that we ended up going through with that block of towns at Athabasca that caused quite a bit of controversy with a different group of residents. And my intent would be that on the 17th, we would obviously have all 5 weeks of opportunity to follow up with the residents and their planner that represents them, along with the applicant. And I would strongly suggest that I would be in a position then to be able to bring some very positive amendments forward. I don't know if deferring this is the way, because I think it just kind of leaves it hung in limbo, really, if you defer this matter. So I guess that's my other concern, because my intent is not to hold this thing up. My intent is to have some good, fruitful discussions by both parties, and hopefully me as that individual, that's that outsider, that we can come to some resolve here and have some amendments moving forward. So that way, because all the residents have all agreed, they know something needs to be built here. Especially the one house, it's run down looking now. It's vacant. It's boarded up because I guess some of the windows got broken. So there's like, I mean, people want something built there. It's just a matter of having something reasonable that integrates well with the community.
Okay, thanks for that. So the motion is on the floor as printed. Councillor Thompson, I think I saw you next, and then Jim Harris.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to staff. I'm just looking for a little bit of clarity. When we have an approved staff report, if this was to go to LPAT, what is the cost to defend this, as we can't defend ourselves?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, I'm not sure if anyone from legal is on the call. They would have a better understanding of the costs, but I can explain what they would be. It would be a professional planner would have to be retained to support council's position at the Ontario Land Tribunal. And I can't hazard a guess at what it would cost, but it most likely would be expensive.
Follow up, Marilyn?
Go ahead.
In that process, and I appreciate your answer, and so just by professional planners and stuff, so there is a cost to it. Could the applicant refer back to the original in the LPAT process, or is it only based on the 46 units that's proposed tonight? So be careful what you ask for, kind of thing. If they went to LPAT, could they go to the original proposal?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, the first application, or the application that was before the city, was for the 88 units. And so they could ask for that approval to be considered by the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Thanks. Knowing through you, Mayor, I'm sorry, knowing the work that Councillor Harvey's done and the concern his residents have, and I understand what he was saying about the development on Athabasca, but I was wondering if, because of that possibility at LPAT, would he not take maybe a friendly to refer it to the next planning committee in January, where you can have the conversations with your residents and the developer? In that planning, you'll have your drop dead answer, whether they're willing to move or it goes to planning, and then you could ask committee to vote it down at that time, and then the developer, but giving you the timelines and the opportunity to have that engagement with both parties. Because if it's voted down and the developer doesn't, we could end up in LPAT with the possibilities of that. So I understand that you feel the timelines didn't work, but just as a compromise and a possibility of a great outcome that everybody's angry at, because that's the greatest negotiation where everybody's mad. So I don't know if that's a possibility or if that's something that even interests you.
Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Obviously, it's something I'm open to. I know I had several options here that I could take tonight. That is one of them. I know when I had some discussions around that, our next planning committee meeting is actually next week. And obviously we can't have it next week because we have a different file that's, I think the clerk wants to say something.
We could defer it to a specific meeting. We can defer it to January. The next planning committee is January 18th. If you wanted to defer it to that meeting, we can put a date to a deferral. So.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I will put that motion on the floor and on Councillor Thompson's suggestion there. I'm not worried about that other initial application. I'll be quite honest with you, because I cannot imagine an LPAT hearing officer even blinking an eye at that proposal. It was 138 units per hectare. It was ridiculously large. But I will put the motion on the floor to refer this to Planning Committee on January the 18th.
Okay, it is technically a deferral motion. We're going to defer the matter if this is approved to the January 18th Planning Committee meeting. That is debatable. Doesn't mean you have to debate it, but it's debatable. So anybody wish to speak to the deferral motion? Councillor Riepma?
Yeah, I'll support that, I think, because Councillor Harvey has certainly indicated that there seems to be a real willingness to have a really detailed discussion. And hopefully when they come back in January, we'll have a solution that everybody is happy with, and then we can move on. And if we don't have that kind of solution, well, then we're no worse off than we are tonight, and we will then have to make a decision. So I'm in favor of moving it to January.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma. Councillor Harris, did you want in on this?
Yeah, sorry, Mayor Lehman. I thought I was in the queue there and I put my hand down. Yeah, and before Councillor Thompson spoke, I was thinking about, alternative one similarly, which I think is kind of where we're going. So I do support this. And I just want to recognize the amount of work that Councillor Harvey has put into this proposal. I just wanted to, commend him for his efforts. So, and I will support the amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other comments on the deferral motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. Those in favor of deferring this to Planning Committee on January 18th? Is anyone opposed? None. That carries unanimously. Thanks, Councillor Harvey. And thank you, staff, for the work on the application. We will talk about it again on the 18th. This brings us to inquiries as we have completed all our matters. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to staff, Ms. Banfield, I have a quick question. It does have to do with 509 Bayfield Street. So that Chick-fil-A that has been approved and has been, I think, captured in some media, that is a type of application called site plan control. So I'm getting some questions from residents now hearing about the approval of that restaurant going into the Georgia Mall vicinity. And I didn't know if you were able to share for those watching tonight, next steps from a development timeline. Is there anything different because it's a site plan control? The only thing that I'm really communicating is that it's within the jurisdiction of staff to be approving, and that there is no public consultation, that the process is closed, tied to that development, but they can still contact the planner. Is there any other information that would be important for the public to be aware of interest to that restaurant?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. So correct, if an application comes in for site plan that conforms to the zoning, site plan approval is delegated to staff, and that's the case in this situation. Site plan approval still is a process. It's public in the sense that people are aware of it. But it doesn't have a public consultation requirement. So you still will see signs on the property. There'll still be a presence on the website, but we don't host a public meeting. But correct, the planner's confirmation or the planner's information is on the is on the website, and people can absolutely take a look at the plans and certainly reach out. We do let ward councillors like yourselves know when we have site plan conditions. The process is to issue conditions of approval that applicants then clear, if you will, and that lets them enter into a site plan agreement with the city. And after that is taken care of, then they can apply for a building permit. So while it's not, as I said, a consultation type public process, it is public. There's still a lot of checks and balances from a technical review perspective. The city requires lots of securities and letters of credit and all those sorts of things to make sure that the people develop in the way that they say they're going to. So it's public, but we just don't host a public meeting on it.
Quick follow-up, if I may. Is there any general timelines that it is available or able to share with the public, or is this really something that will unfold and still be posted on our website as available, or do we have an awareness of how this might take shape over time?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. So really, once the conditions are issued, the timing is in the hands of the applicant. It does depend on how quickly they respond and how quickly their timeline is to apply for a building permit. Again, a building permit, once it's issued, will be posted on the property as well. So it can happen relatively quickly, or in some cases, it can take a little bit longer.
Thank you for that. No further questions.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Any other inquiries of staff? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, through you to Ms. Banfield, and also a planning question. So interesting concept it went through. We'll see what happens. And that was kind of an anomaly. I'm speaking about the Dunlop Street one, where we're requiring them to come back with kind of a rendering of what it would look like if they were to conform to a type of zoning. I didn't have as much concern about that one specifically in terms. So what I'm about to say is I don't like the fact that it could add cost and delays to a project when it's already something they're not even bringing forward. So I don't have too much concern about that one, obviously, because those are luxury and it's going to be spread out. But let's say a different application. So here's my question to you. Do we currently require all applicants to bring forward a block plan or a rendering that essentially says, if you give us no zoning variances whatsoever, this is what we can build on the site? And then I have follow-ups to that one.
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Morales. No, we don't ask that for that. And we often say to people, the best way to start the process is to show us actually what you want to build. And then we kind of work from there.
Okay. Would, from your planning perspective, would that be a concern to, this was a very watershed moment for me that could kind of set some precedents in direction and redirection moving forward. Again, I wasn't going to say it's going to add cost because we're talking about luxury units, but for other applications, would you have at the moment planning concern if council were to start requiring it from every application? Because if council didn't, and it's the will of council, I think it would only be fair to do it all or nothing. This ad hoc thing for me personally, once again, my personal opinion, personally wouldn't be appropriate, but I'm just curious as from a planning perspective, you would have any concerns about requiring that?
So actually, Ms. Banfield, Councillor Morales, number one, you're still arguing the previous application. And secondly, I don't think it's fair to ask staff that kind of a question. Our staff have a process. Council chose tonight. It was 6-4 vote, I think. Took us a few times to get to that. It was a 6-4 vote to ask for that additional rendering. I don't think there's any suggestion that it become a regular part of our process. It was the action that Planning Committee chose to take tonight on that application. So I'd encourage you to follow up with Ms. Banfield about this particular piece if you have a concern about it. But there was no delay to the application. There's no new process step. On this particular application, Planning Committee's requested a new rendering.
So I wasn't debating the previous application, I was referencing it. There's a difference between debating and
you made a number of comments in the process of asking a question
to reference
question council's previous decision, which you're not supposed to do. So my point is, this is inquiries of staff, not a speech about process or what we should or shouldn't do with an application with a question at the end of it. So if you have a specific inquiry of staff, I would urge you to ask a simple question of staff and not make a speech about the previous application or the hypothetical of us changing the processes, because there's no watershed moment here. This was something that Planning Committee chose by vote of Planning Committee to ask of this particular application.
Okay, I hear your opinion. Ms. Banfield,
It's not an opinion.
I
I'm the
was
chair of the
not,
meeting, and I'm ruling on your inquiry. So if you'd like to make an inquiry, go ahead.
okay, Ms. Banfield, the inquiry, notwithstanding the results of the previous application that is finalized. Mayor Lehman,
Yeah.
I said not touching that. That's what I meant. I'm not touching that.
Okay, so the application is not finalized, Councillor Morales.
Sorry, the vote, not the application, the vote that was already taken. I'm not touching that, but I'm saying, okay, would this be something that would be considered for the official plan? Or is that something that the council would have to alter in a different process, requiring applications to have a block plan, excuse me, block plan or site plan on existing zoning? This is a macro question.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Council Morales, staff often ask for a block plan. Staff don't often ask for massing of the existing zoning on a property.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other inquiries of staff, members of committee? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Moore.
Sorry, just when Councillor Morales you brought up a question of clarification. So on the January 10th meeting, we'll be approving the motion to have a alternate plan drawn up and also the whole plan, or was that motion earlier postpone that decision on the overall? I can't remember how we did that.
The clerk can clarify, but I believe we added a paragraph to request that information come at the time that council considers the final approval. So the motion was the original motion was on the floor and passed as part of it was an amendment to the motion that was on the floor.
Right, but both will come up for approval on January 10th.
Correct.
So are we approving the plan on January 10th and approving the other one? Because there won't be a requirement for the developer to provide that plan until we've approved it on January 10th.
Well, that would delay their application. So I'm going to suggest that it's pretty likely that over the next 5 weeks, there'd be an
You might
effort
ask them to do it earlier.
fulfill the information that planning committee has asked for tonight.
Okay.
I mean, you're correct. They could wait for council approval. Any other inquiries of staff, members of committee? Okay, if not, that completes the planning committee agenda this evening. General committee and city council, December 13th, 2021. And we do have planning committee the next night for the purpose of a public meeting on Essa Road. Just a note before we adjourn, both those meetings will be held remotely. Most of the content for both meetings is presentations going to be made by outside agencies and members of the public anyway. We'll send some more information to council, but just as a heads up to those watching, for various reasons, we're going to move those meetings remote. We'll put some more information out the next day or two. Thanks very much, everyone. Planning